Hello everyone, in today's video we're going to be taking a look at the A-10C, the lovely Fairchild Republic aircraft that's been part of my flight everything for a very, very, very long time. And the incredible thing is they even modeled the uh, gun camera lens? I don't know, let's get started. So first things first, when you climb aboard this thing, it's important to know this is not a DCS quality module. Yes, we are here at Nellis Air Force Base, for those of you keeping score, but it is important to realize that a lot of the things you might be used to pushing are just not there. Like you'll actually hold your mouse over this button. What's this one do? It'll just say in op. Maybe in the future we're going to get that functionality, but for now, this thing's pretty basic. It'll definitely fly around for those of you who like being in a VR. I really enjoy this aircraft in VR because it's stupid maneuverable because it's got that nice straight wing. And there is absolutely no payload on this thing, which makes it a lot easier. So what we're going to be doing today is we're going to be taking off from lovely Nellis Air Force Base and flying up to Creech Air Force Base. I've modified my start location so the runway is right there to make my life a little bit easier. So let's go ahead and run you through the motion, shall we? First things first, what I'm going to do is I'm going to come wandering down here. I find this very interesting that if you grab this guy and actually crank this, you can see the different levels of fuel on board. For example, I can see I've got about 4,000 pounds per side exterior wing, and my exterior center tank is holding about 4,000 pounds as well. We are a heavy airplane, and of course, if I want to, you can pop on int and see our total internal fuel, which is plenty. We've got about 11,000 pounds of fuel just internally on this aircraft, and popping it to main, you can see that as well. What we're going to do now is we're going to come down here and find the battery switch. It's located right here. We're going to pop that on real quick. That makes our life a little bit easier. We're going to pop on the standby inverter, and while that's going, I'm actually going to reach over here and pop on the APU start right there, and that's got to get that thing spinning. We do have an APU gauge here as well as an EGT gauge for it, and you'll probably observe the fact that these two are basically in sync with each other. Yeah, we know it's not going to do that in the real world, but hey, at least we know if it's running. Next, what I like to do is I like to float back here, and it's kind of hard to see. So one of the things you'll notice is there's actually an adjustment here where if you click on this, you can turn on your lights. And the cool thing here is you have your panel lighting here. If you turn that on, it makes it easier. You've got your console light, which makes it way, way easier to see what you're doing. And then there is this really fun one. If you turn this one on, it turns on your helmet mounted sight. Yay! That's really cool, actually. I like that. We'll turn the helmet mounted sight on a little later on. With that taken out, it's nice and simple. We can hear the APU fired up here. I can actually come over here and turn this power on to the APU. That's going to get us plenty of juice, giving us some time to basically run around and hit kind of our last set of switches. Another thing I want to do too, I'm on this side, is I want to let everybody know that we're over here. So I'm going to turn on my anti-collision light, which is going to get flashing up on the tail there. And now notice how easy it is to read. Now, your instrument displays, you can adjust their brightness too. There's a day and a night mode. So basically, if you grab this thing and give it a crank, you can kind of really crank it brighter or lighter. Personally, I like to make it so I can see it, but obviously I don't want to blind myself with it. Same one on this side, you can see there's a day-night switch, and you can fiddle with this quite a bit. It seems to have like a brightness and like a contrast thing going on. One thing worth noting, though, is these are simplified. I'm just trying to be nice to the people who developed it because this thing's so cool. You basically have two screens. That's it. You can't push the middle one. You can't push these or anything like that. And believe it or not, on our TAD, which is basically our HSI, there's enough detail on here to get you out of trouble. But just keep in mind, this is a relatively simplified avionics compared to probably what you're used to. So while the APUs are running there, one of the things I'm going to do is I'm going to float down here. We have a CDU as well as a kind of like an FMS key is the best way to describe this thing. It's pretty basic. Not a bad thing, but it's just simple. They try to keep it simple, which I'm okay with simple. I'm okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here, and apparently I'm out of oxygen. I forgot to put some in this morning. My bad. We'll fix that in a minute. So I'm going to come over to FPM, and that's going to be our init page, and we're going to dial where we're going to. So in this case, we're going to be coming from KLSV. I get that wrong every time. Sierra Victa. We're going to press the slash right here, and we're simply going to dial in our destination, which is going to be Kins. Like I said, it's Creech Air Force Base there. KNS, good to go. That's perfect. Click right here. It's going to ask me, do you want to do a flight plan? No. And then what we're going to do is we're going to set in our cost index. I don't understand why there'd be a cost index on an A-10, but why not? And of course, we can dial in our cruise flight level too if we wanted to. Like if we want to do 8,500 feet, we can just pop that in there right there, and it's pretty much all set to go. And that's about as much fun as you can have on this particular device. We can adjust its brightness if you needed to. All those buttons are there. There's no like next page button or anything like that. You can see that button is disabled. If I did want to go to like a specific waypoint, I could come in here and dial it in. If you are hardcore and you really, really want to be using this, one of the things I actually recommend doing is actually coming in here, and when you build your flight plan, you can actually build it. And then one of the buttons you have here is to send it to the avionics of the aircraft. This is an awesome way to basically get this stuff loaded so you don't have to sit here and fiddle it with it yourself. So with that out of the way, it's going to be a good idea to get our engines rolling. So if I come over on this side, it's pretty simplified compared to the way it would be like over in DCS, but I don't mind that. I think it actually makes it easier. We have a set of 4 boost pumps. We're just going to make sure each one of those pumps is in the on position. Looks good to me. Crossfeed should be off. Gate should be off. And what we're going to do is normally what you'd have to do is engage the thing once it gets to a certain RPM, is you'd have to click this over this little hump here. You can actually see the diagram here on the right. I'm not going to do that. I'm simply going to go click, click, just like that. And what it will do is it will start both of our engines together. Now, one of the things I find very interesting here is you have a couple different engine instrument gauges, which makes this a little bit unique of an aircraft. There are noises happening behind me. You can actually jump to the rear view here, and you can see very clearly the 2 engines are happily sucking themselves into life here. This one would be normally your N2. This would be your N1 speed if you're looking for something specific here. You can see our fuel flow suddenly twitched, which means we do have ignition, which is a good thing for us. And of course, you'll watch everything slowly start spooling up. Again, our percent RPM should have come up a very long time ago. We'll probably be sitting at about 35, 40 right now. I'm not 100% sure why they chose to model it that way. Also, oil pressure is coming up, which is good. Fuel flow is going up. Fan speed, which is like, again, we're turbofans on a fighter. Yes, I know we're not a fighter or an attack, but you know what I mean. Good time, of course, to set your barometric pressures and all that if you have not done so already. You can also see that our new course is actually generated on our handy-dandy little pad here to make it a little bit easier for us to see where we're going. Obviously, we could run through the whole fun process of hitting all these different switches to like pretend we're going through the motions of like arming things. There's a master arm, but the reality is none of that's going to work. And like I said, we're a flying experience with this aircraft. One of the things I was fiddling with, of course, is trying to get this brighter. I was a little disappointed. We have a little intensity gauge. This is what you'd be using for it. And of course, like you can see, it doesn't really tweak. That's okay, though, because we can always come down here and we can actually pop on our helmet-mounted sight, which looks like this. In the real world, of course, when you move your head here, the helmet-mounted sight would appear. When I move my head here, it would immediately vanish, and basically the heads-up display would show whatever data that we're looking at. Helmet-mounted sight's pretty straightforward. Of course, you can see our direction that we're facing here, our direction the airplane's facing right here. Airspeed's on the left, you have altitude on the right, selected altitude. Over here on this side, you've got your angle of attack, Mach number, G-force, and of course you have a little reference. In the real world, what I could do is I could look at that tree and be like, hey, teammate, look, there's a tree over there. And just like that. So what we're going to do is give the engines a quick little blast just to make sure they spool properly. Delightful. Let's go pop on the generators. And now that the generators are on, we can take off the APU generators, give them a little blast, make sure they're working, and we're just going to go ahead and pop off the APU. Just like that, we should have a running engine. Nice. Everything is running smoothly. At this point, we're going to come down here. We're going to arm our stability control. They also have the automatic pilot on here. That's basically what this button does. I recommend just having a button on your keyboard for it. Basically, you have path hold, you have altitude heading mode, and you have altitude mode. We'll take a look at these all once we get in the air. And of course, if you did need to use the radio, you can come down here at any time and basically use these knobs to change what station you're on. So if we want to go to 125, we can just use that knob just like that. It's like 125.5. We could dial in it just like that and be pretty much ready to rock. Last thing we need to do in this aircraft, of course, is get our flaps ready for takeoff. So I'm going to go ahead and bring in 2 clicks of flaps, just like that. Now they're going to rotate down on their own. You can see your flap indicator over on this side. We also have anti-skid. Always a nice thing to have in the event that you have to lock off your brakes on a landing. There are times when you do not want anti-skid. And there's one more little detail that they did not include on this one, and that's the fact that we have this little switch here for nose wheel steering. We don't actually have to worry about that in this one. You can just basically just point your nose where you want with your rudder pedals without a lot of consequences. All right, let's get rolling. So I'm going to go take off the parking brake, and we're going to give it a little bit of power. And remember, we are in maximum airshow configuration right now. What I'm saying by that is the fact that our aircraft is extraordinarily light. Even though we have almost 20,000 pounds of fuel, you recognize the external tanks, by the way, right? Even though we have that much fuel on board, this thing is just going to want to go. It just has very, very little drag, and now they modeled it with very little drag, which is, it's cool. It makes for a really fun fighter jet. It doesn't make for an A-10. So let's go ahead and taxi ourselves onto the runway here. I'll line up with a good old-fashioned runway 3 left there. And kick it off with just a little bit. I'm going to hold the brakes. All right, we are turbofans, so we want to make sure we're at full power before we do anything stupid, like pull back early or pull back late or any of those things. So I'm going to go ahead and apply power, about 3/4. Hear how long they take to spool up? Looking for 140 knots. Hand on the gear lever. Up, off we go. We're going to hold that nose up fairly steep here. Fairly steep, fairly steep. Like I told you, this thing has no drag. Landing gear come up, flaps come up. I'm going to let the nose sink a little bit. And we're going to go pull the power back. Now, if this were a DCS version of the A-10, we would not be doing 250 knots right now. We'd be lucky if we're doing 210. So not that it's exaggerated, but it's definitely sped up. So one of the things you probably observe is as I move around here, you can see on my heads-up display, there are a couple little details that have appeared. Try to zoom in about as best as I can there, including that lovely one that's giving me some information. You've got the 290 and you've got 37.8. So one of the things I'll observe here is if you look really carefully right where my crosshair is pointed, does everybody see that little marker right there? That is giving me an indication of the direction that I need to travel. So as I slowly move in this direction, you can see that I have a selected direction of 0, 0, 0. Now this is where everybody gets very confused. That selected direction of 0, 0, 0 is the heading selected direction. It's not the direction of the waypoint. What this is actually showing you right here is where we actually need to fly for the purposes of getting to the selected waypoint. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and execute a gentle left turn here. Now watch what happens as we start to kind of migrate in this direction. What you'll observe is this heading here, the 285, where we need to go to get to our destination, is going to slowly change, because obviously I'm not pointing at it. But the other thing you'll observe is it'll actually appear on the ground as something we can actually see. And that's one of the things I actually really like about an A-10 here. About 60, let's go about 50% throttle. Again, I'm zoomed in aggressively so you can see it. We don't get that on the helmet-mounted sight, which is kind of a shame because the A-10's helmet-mounted sight is fabulous. And as I pull myself out of this turn real quickly here, you can see very clearly that my destination is right over there on the other side of that mountain. Isn't that really cool how it does that? So if you're in bad conditions or something, it makes it so you can still actually see where you're going. You can actually center yourself up with it really, really effectively. Again, I'll give myself a little bit of up trim here to make this a little bit easier of a flight. Oh boy, come on A-10, you're not fly-by-wire, you're conventional. Don't even pretend to be fly-by-wire. A couple more things you'll notice on the right-hand side here. You can see the distance to our waypoint, you can see the time to our waypoint, and of course you can see the time of arrival on the waypoint, which I think is wild. Now here's where things get kind of interesting. If I were to activate my autopilot master and let go, what you'll observe is the aircraft puts itself into immediate dive. Now if I pull it back up and sort of stabilize myself, I'll fix everything I did, and then come back down again, you'll notice that one of the switches here was not armed. You have the radar altimeter here, which is a nice thing to do. You'll notice if I push the master arm and engage, again, nothing happens. The aircraft will simply fall because they haven't modeled that particular component yet. So if you are wondering why it seems to be having some issues with you, that would be why. Now, when it comes to navigation, navigation could be easier in this aircraft. I'm actually going to pop off the helmet-mounted sight for a second here and make my life a little bit easier. There we go. Now we can actually see what I'm talking about. So one of the things you'll notice here on our lovely TAD here is you can see the course we have selected right along the side, as well as our heading selected, and as well as our current position. So we're about to clear that mountain pass right there. And the crazy thing is you can actually follow that route directly if you need to. Now, another feature we have, which is really handy, let me freeze myself mid-flight here, ignore the sounds. If I were to hide this now, you would notice that we have a standard HSI here, which is actually providing us with what we want. Remember when I mentioned that selected heading was there? This is the tool you can use to actually adjust that. So if you want to set your selected heading to be exactly the same as basically your course you'd like to travel on. Now, the crazy thing is these buttons are all very, very, very important, including this one, which will basically allow you to control where we're getting our steering information. If I hit that particular one, you can see everything does that little happy twitch there. That's because we're switching between our TACAN as well as our regular HSI, which is going to be providing us with that directional information. Not HSI, our GPS, basically. So we'll give this thing some power and we'll be on our way. Now, normally with this A-10, we have a tremendous amount of drag. It is very, very challenging to get this aircraft to get up to about 300. Like, you'd be standing on full power for like the first half of the flight, basically. But one of the things you'll observe is if I kick it up to full power, this thing very easily will exceed 300 knots. That's pretty impressive for an attack plane. Just kidding. I think you have the idea. So it can be a very quick plane, especially if you're flying it just to kind of tool around and not do your normal flying sort of thing, which is something I enjoy to do quite a bit. Like I said, just enjoyable flying. So I know, of course, our destination is right off over the nose there. It's about 23 miles. I just love this heads-up display. I find this fantastically simple to operate. You can just look right at it in an instant and know exactly where you need to kind of turn in order to get where you need to go. Again, I can gently swing over in that direction, get myself all relined up just like that. You can also see that the two horizontal vertical bars have reappeared to basically show my selected heading, but I know that my destination is going to be up there. So let's fast forward to where we get there. There we are. There is our destination, just like I predicted. As you'll notice, depending on your head position is going to determine where that square actually ends up. And of course, the square should be at the middle of that airbase, should be something like that, but they haven't quite finished the calculations for that. So we've reached our destination. It's now time to go ahead and head back down to the ground. It's relatively easy with this aircraft. In the real one, it has so much drag, you could basically pull the throttle back a little tiny bit and just let the nose get heavy on you and just guide it right in. Landing this aircraft is a pretty easy experience, unless you are very, very heavy and loaded like we are. You'll probably notice we're still at 19,000 pounds. We're at F-15 level fuel capacity right now, just to give you an idea. One of the things you have to remember is because this is a straight wing plane, is that your feet are going to matter. So when you're taking your turns, you have to be very extra careful to basically coordinate. So what I'm going to do here is if I take a look down here, you have a pretty good look of my little airbase here. There's good old-fashioned Creech. And we're going to be landing right there. You can see runway 26 is looking pretty large and in charge. When we took off today, of course, we took off the other direction, but the wind has shifted a little bit, so I'm not going to worry about it too much. So as we come by here, one of the things we can do, which I love about this plane, is the classic overhead approach, where basically we're going to do a big tight circle and dirty up the plane for the purposes of landing. I'm going to execute my left turn. Don't forget to be using your feet. We're going to give it a tug, and you're going to hear some wind noises. And then they're going to hear some beeping. A single beep simply refers to the fact that you're getting low, or you're getting basically a high angle of attack. The double beep is you're already stalling, stop goofing around. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and put my left wing right on the end of the wing, the runway there. I'll come swing around. We're pretty high up. Speed brakes in the real A-10 are very, very, very effective. There we go. Go ahead and go straighten out right there. Again, don't forget to use your feet as you're coming back out. And we're basically going to drag our downwind down. It's very tempting to basically arc around right now and come flying in. But trust me, this thing just does not have the drag. So one of the things I will do to help me out with landing a little bit is I will flip my helmet mounted sight back on. You don't have to leave it on all the time. But it does make it a little bit easier to see my approaching speed, even though this is not an issue of speed. I'll show you what I mean. All right, under 200 knots, we're going to go ahead and dirty up the airplane. Dirty, dirty airplane. We got a click of flaps in. We're going to bring in that second click of flaps. They don't go down that fast in the real world. And I love this. You can look out the window, and you can basically see what your speed is as you start coming around, just like that. Delightful. So you can see it's about 160 knots. We're starting to get a little fast. I'm actually going to bring the nose up because we're getting too fast. Keep in mind, we are at idle throttle right now. Like I would mention, this thing definitely is does not have enough drag. So one of the cool tricks here is I will never be able to get this plane on the ground, so I'm actually going to slip the plane. Yes, you can slip military aircraft. You can't even slip an A-10 kind of a hit like that. Since we're just not feeling it. Like I said, without the speed brakes that they've modeled, it makes it a little more challenging. So we're just going to fly the plane sideways. One of the things I appreciate here is I can just peek up this little side here. Tough to do in some other planes. And I'm just going to use that as my reference point. And I'm already in a position where this flight is now untenable. So what I'm going to do is give it full throttle. I'm going to bring up my flap here. I'm going to go ahead and bring up my flaps gently. And I'm going to go ahead and climb out at about 250 knots. Now, if I tried to force that landing, this aircraft never would have been able to stop in the length of the runway. That is just the quirk of this particular model. So I'm going to go bring us around again with a lower approach. All right, that was fun. So landing this aircraft, relatively straightforward. Like I said, that speed control, it was critical that you make that decision to go around early. We're looking usually between 135 and 145 during a typical approach, but we are pretty darn heavy. The better really method to land this thing is if you look right there, see that little green circle? You'll notice if I pull back, it turns into that. You'll notice if I push forward, you'll see it turns into that. Your goal is to try to keep that as a green circle during the approach. You don't even need to pay attention to your speed. You just need to pay attention to the green circle. You can do really silly things like set up here this far. And one of the cool bits is if you take a look at that little circle with the wings on it, you can actually center that on the end of the runway during your approach here like this. And once you have it centered on the runway, you can basically just fly the green circle all the way down. So you can see right now I've got the centered on the end of the runway. I'm doing about 136, which is really good speed actually. And I'm right at the correct angle of attack. And I know that because of that little green circle you have sitting right there. So green circle at the end of the runway, green circle on the left of the screen, you're doing fine. There we go. That's a much safer approach than last time. See, we're starting to get a little slow. I can let the nose come down a little bit to pick up speed. I don't have to apply throttle. Throttle is really there for up and down. Nose drop down is for speed. There we go. That's all it took. Still a little high here, but that's okay. There we go. You can see I'm centered right on the end of the runway. We're getting a little fast. Once again, we can go ahead and give it a little bit of slip. We are. Over the end of the runway. Straighten out. And basically what you're doing, there's your little float. Again, this aircraft would have slowed down a long time ago. And you'll see that you end up in this little hover, even though we're only about 5 knots fast. And all you're doing is looking to settle the plane on the ground. There we are. Gently apply the brakes. And just like that, we're back. Now, as you can see, like I said, definitely missing some drag. But as long as you recognize the fact that you are missing some drag, it's really not that bad of an airplane to fly. And this actually puts us at a really, really good turnoff here. And remember, we're still carrying 18,000 pounds of fuel on this thing, so you'd expect it to be slightly more, but that's okay. So once you got this thing back on the ground, it's a relatively straightforward process. We just have to kind of head over to wherever we would like to end our flight. Shutting down is simply a matter of clicking everything back off. You can go ahead and cut the fuel off right there on your left. And then once that's done, kill the batteries, and you're good to go. Enjoy.